Hey, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks for your patience with our setup this morning. I'm very excited to have with us today a gentleman who I've known for quite a few years, has quite a history as a music producer, engineer, recording artist here in the Bay Area in San Francisco. Formerly of a couple of really cool bands that
Nobody's heard of.
Oh, the Sextons?
No, nobody's heard of that.
Nobody's heard of the Sextons? No. I've heard of them.
Yeah. Well, you're from that time period.
Oh gosh. I think you and I both. Yeah. So Matt has an amazing history here in the Bay Area. And if I didn't already say his name, this is Matt Boudreau. And Matt has very interestingly created a podcast series that we're going to be talking about today. And here's his very first book. That he'll be talking to us about.
Based on the podcast.
Based on the podcast. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's called Working Class Audio. Have you guys heard of this? Working Class Audio? Yeah. Yeah, it's really entertaining. You're a great interviewer.
Thank you.
And a great speaker. And I enjoy listening to it. And it's great to see that you're actually publishing now. So everybody, let's give a warm welcome to Matt Boudreau.
Yeah. So I started to just think, I'm going to write a blog of some type. I'm going to create a blog. And then I was like, oh, working class. Oh, I'll call it Working Class Audio. Started this blog, realized I wasn't really into writing. And I was like, God, maybe I should just do this in some kind of audio way. And I was like, oh, duh. I'll make a podcast and I'll talk to people and see what they do. I'll ask them questions about how they survive, how they pay their bills, and how they stay in audio. What are their strategies, whether they're, no matter what part of the industry they're in, from an audio discipline perspective, as a professional, what are they doing? So I created this podcast, and I was, had gone through some rough patches there with my wife, and was a little hesitant to just say, yeah, I'm at home working on this podcast. So I was like, if I make money at this podcast, I'll discuss it with her, but I'll just try it out. I did 5 episodes. And how many of you have heard of Pensato's Place? Mm-hmm. Okay. Dave Pensato's worked with some pretty heavy people, and his manager Herb, they have a YouTube channel. I got a call from a guy who worked for them who said, my name is, it was this guy Chevy Shevlin. He actually ended up making a video with Al Schmidt about recording a big band. Chevy calls and says, I just want to let you know your podcast is pretty awesome, and you have the makings of something here that could bring on advertisers. And, maybe I can help with that, maybe I can't. I just want to just kind of, be that person whispering in your ear. I hang up the phone and I'm like, advertising. So I sent an email to my friend Jules, who runs a website you may have heard of called Gear Sluts. And Jules is practiced in the art of banner ads. And I was like, maybe I should do some banner ads. Jules knows what he's doing. Hey, Jules, give me a holler back. I want to talk to you about banner ads. What for? And I explain, I have this podcast, here's the URL. He checks it out, and I get this frantic email. Call me on Skype right now. Well, he's in London. So get him on the phone. I'm like, hey, what's going on? He's like, so look, this podcast you're doing, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and this is outstanding, and I want to be a part of it. Forget the banner advertising conversation for the short term. Let's talk about how we can help each other out. And so it's like, okay, I got nothing to lose here. Gear Sluts has a huge audience. He's willing to promote the show. If I, talk about Gear Sluts, he's an old friend. Why not? What's the harm in that? So I start doing it, and I start to see the numbers just go, and it just starts climbing, and I just start to hear from various people, and hired a friend of mine to do business consulting, and do you know what This Week in Tech, Twitch, YouTube channel that has all kinds of tech type stuff? They're up in Petaluma. My friend Andrew Stass knows these people. He knows the CEO. So he goes up to Petaluma. Well, he lives up in Petaluma. So he goes over to their offices and says, here's my buddy Matt. He's got this podcast. he wants to monetize a little more than he is. What should he do? And Lisa, the CEO, said he has to do this, he has to do this, he has to do this. Once a week, not this 2 times a month crap. And so he came back and he says, this is what Lisa says you need to do. And so I just said, all right. So I started to do it, started to bring on sponsors.
Can you break that down a little for us, maybe, just so they get a sense of what your, kind of your directive was to make this really
My
viable?
directive, I'll tell you, was an inspiration to, obviously, the content of the show is to find out the answers I was seeking and how to kind of learn from my mistakes. But
This is really, I think, a very important point because you went through your own cathartic experience, right? Life-changing, dramatic life-changing experience. And what brought you out the other side was really an exploration of the answers to that cathartic experience in a way.
you have to be willing to, I know that all of you have a vision of where you want to be and what you want to do. And you're probably pretty bullheaded about it. You've got the tenacity to show up here and learn from what Greg and everybody else here has to teach you. But you also have to be willing to look inside yourself, be honest with yourself, and be realistic with what the world has out there for you. And just a point of reference, if you ever get the chance, you can just go on YouTube, I'm sure, and find it. There's 2 movies you got to watch. The Decline of Western Civilization, it's about punk bands, and The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, The Metal Years. They're depressing in many ways, but you might walk away with some key points of that. Because it's people like, the Metal Years one in particular is like showing these guys, in the 80s, long hair and dressed in ridiculous clothes, which I'm sure at some point we have done in our life.
Oh yeah.
And it's them being interviewed by people, saying, well, so what are you going to do if this band thing doesn't work out? Oh, it's going to work out. I'm going to make it. What if you don't make it? Oh, but I will. And it's very sobering to watch. And you have to be honest with yourself, like I say, about like, what if I don't? What if this doesn't work out? How can I stay on the path that I'm on? And that's kind of where we're driving at with this conversation. So I started to get some sponsors, Audio Technica, Universal Audio. Money started to come in for this podcast. And after being at it for a year, about.
How many episodes would you say it took to get you there?
I can't honestly remember.
Uh-huh.
It's because I started out at 2 times a month, and then I started going 4 times a month, or once every week, every Monday, with great consistency, never failing, no matter what. And I finally got this check from one of the sponsors. So my first check was like $6,000, and my wife came home, and I said, "Hey, I had a history with my wife where I would tell her about every little thing going on. Oh, I'm working on this. Oh yeah, it's gonna be great. It's gonna work out. Oh, it didn't work out. Oh, I'm working on this. Oh, it's gonna be great. It's gonna work out. Oh, it didn't work out. Oh, this little thing worked out." She just dragging her through the emotion of like, ooh, this is gonna work out. It's not working out. That she couldn't deal with that, and she was very clear to me when we were kind of getting our act together, or I was getting my act together to make sure our marriage stayed intact. She's like, just don't tell me about every single thing you're working on every single day, because I know it's turbulent, I get it, but it's stressful. So she came home one day and I just said, hey, here's this check, here's what I've been up to. And she was like, wow, cool. You're making money from this podcast. Wow, that's really great. So she now knew of this podcast, and I started to work on it more. And
I take it she's not a musician.
She's not. My wife works for a software company, and she was like, just straight A student in school. Very went to a girls Catholic school. Actually, I don't know if it was an all-girls Catholic school. She's just very straight-laced, very, practical, not artistically minded person. So me being who I was, artistically minded, entrepreneurial minded, or that was coming into view a little better now with the podcast. It's a little bit of a yin and yang thing going on there.
It's a good balance.
It can be a very good balance, yeah. So the podcast started to take off, and I would go to trade shows, and people would be like, "Oh my God, you're that guy! I listen to your show every week," and it started to be like, "Oh, this is actually kind of working." So the podcast gets about 20,000 downloads a month, and the sponsors come and go. And Eric Keenel, who's actually in the building.
Did you hear that? 20 grand a month.
No, 20,000 a month. 20,000 a month in downloads.
Oh, okay.
Not
in money.
Not in money.
No. Okay.
No.
I was like, wow, 20 grand a month on a podcast. Hey, you're really doing great.
Yeah, maybe I should start a podcast. Well, I need to talk about this part of it before I get to Eric's involvement. So the podcast was happening, and along the way, in kind of self-exploration, I realized, okay, you can't just do one thing.
That's a good.
Okay? The key term here, if you can remember anything of what I've said when you walk out of this room for your own careers, remember the word diversification. Diversification is often a term heard in financial circles with investments where people say, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Put a little money here in this investment vehicle, a little money here in this financial vehicle. And that way, if this thing tanks, you still have money over here, right? It's the same with income streams. If you have, let's say that you're a live sound engineer and you work at a bar and that's your only gig. You do live sound there, that pays all your bills. Well, let's say that bar happens to accidentally serve alcohol to a minor and it gets shut down. There goes your income stream. So it's fine to work for others if you're going to work for others. But if you do, make sure that you get a little bit of money from here, a little bit of money from here, and a little bit of money from here. Imagine it like pillars holding up a building. You don't want just one pillar to hold up your building. You want multiple pillars, right? Anybody here read Forbes magazine? Okay. You know what Forbes declared this week?
Serena.
Forbes declared that Jay-Z is the first
He's the first billionaire.
billionaire rapper.
Yeah.
Because it was a common misconception that Dr. Dre was a billionaire, but in fact he's not. And there's a couple key things that came out of the article that I read. And it said that Jay-Z, his quote was, I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. The key here's the comma. He has multiple businesses that he's created. And instead of endorsing different products, he's created businesses, right? And anybody here know who Warren Buffett is? Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, everybody knows who Warren Buffett is. Wow. Warren Buffett, in that same article on NPR, said, people today, if you're trying to learn about business, he's one of the guys to look to, right? So keep that in mind. Look to Jay-Z for some ideas on business, but also swing back from my thing, diversification. It's absolutely key. So, what is it that you want to do?
Me?
Yeah.
Producer and composer.
Okay, that's cool. Now, if you're going to do that, dedicate time to that, but also try to develop other avenues of income around that, so that maybe you make a little money from producing and composing, but maybe you have a couple other side gigs. And that can mean not just music or audio-based gigs. That can mean like, hey, you want to work part-time at Starbucks because you want health insurance? Do that part-time, produce and compose, and then think of another thing. Think of not as many things, because you don't want to do too many, but try to get like starting with 3 as your basis. Because bar stools can be held up with 3 legs, not 2. So, and 4 is good. That holds me up here. So think of it like that. So that if the Starbucks gig goes, you have producing and composing and maybe one other gig, and so you have to replace that income. And each step of the way, evaluate what you're doing with those and And if you have an opportunity to change an income stream, swap one out for another because it's more lucrative, then you do it. So here's how I do that. I have the podcast, that makes money, and we'll get to the book in a minute. But I also I got a call one day, and before actually, let me backtrack. I was, in that post-studio funk, and I was like, okay, I've got to bring in money. Got the podcast bringing in money. I took on this karaoke gig, this live karaoke gig. A friend of mine was like, hey, can you come play drums with our live band karaoke gig? I was like, okay. Go to Walnut Creek to this bar. Drunk people getting up. Hey man, I want to play this song. I said, okay, right, that's okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's play the song. Did that for 2 years straight. We'd go on Thursday nights to do it once a week. It was bringing in an extra $400 a month, right? And that in the Bay Area, is not much, but it was one income stream to add to the pile. I was burning out on that. I was getting up at 6 the following morning to get my kids ready for school because my wife was already out the door to her corporate job. So I was super grumpy. I was like, I gotta replace that income stream. Get a call one day. I'm at a trade show. A friend of mine from Universal Audio calls. Hey, we think we have a gig for you, a part-time gig as a contractor. And I was like, okay, tell me. He says, well, we want you to do QA work, quality assurance work for our plugins. And I was like, this is my friend Flip calling. I was like, Flip, I don't know why you think I would be good for that. I don't know the first thing about QA. And he goes, no, hear me out. What you have is you have eons of audio experience that we can't teach you, but we can teach you how to QA the way we want you to QA. And I was like, okay, I get it, okay. But I said, dude, I'm not commuting from Lafayette down to Scotts Valley where you guys are. He's like, no. Once again, hear me out. You can do this from home. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, what does that pay? Pays this, okay. All right. I thought, I can get rid of the karaoke gig and swap it out for this gig. Now I've got QA gig, I've got the podcast, and
well, the bonus on the QA side is you're getting a lot of plugins.
well,
plug,
I was
right?
already a UA artist anyway, so I was already getting the plugins for free.
Okay.
But now I'm in development of those plugins, and I failed to mention that I was mixing and mastering and doing recording at other studios as my other income stream ever since I left my studio in the city. So these three things, these different aspects of audio, development, a podcast about audio, and just audio work in general, bringing in income. And mind you, I'm trying to do all this while I'm paying off. You remember I told you about all that money I spent? Well, I just actually paid it all off like 6 or 8 months ago. All that money I spent at that studio.
Yeah, right.
So I got out of that studio as of January 2012. It's 2019. It took me that long to pay all that money off. I owed Cutting Edge $14,000. All these credit cards. I had to get rid of it. And so I know we're kind of jumping around here, but a lot of this, and I'm leaving a bunch of stuff out too, that is key to this. There's a few things that I started to think about, and you might want to start to think about too, just to kind of diversify your financial picture for the future, your music and audio business for the future. Start to look into passive income, or what we used to call mailbox money, right? Money that is made while you sleep, whether you're working or not. How many of you are familiar with, let's talk about some video services. Do any of you know my buddy Warren Hewart? Okay, Warren's got a thing called Produce Like a Pro, does a lot of interviews. What about Pure Mix?
Yeah, it's like an audio program.
Yeah, audio. So they're audio things that they're like videos you can buy or subscriptions you can get. Well, the people on the other side of that are getting passive income because, while there's, in some cases, there's one person or there's a crew of people depending on the organization we're talking about, they create digital content that's useful to you. What about Graham Cochran? Anybody hear of Graham Cochran? Recording studio or home studio revolution.
Oh, yeah.
I'm forgetting the name of
It
it.
is Home Studio Revolution.
Home studio revolution.
Yeah.
Graham makes about $1 million a year through courses and coaching, through creating passive income. So we won't go too deep into it, but start to Google it, look it up. I started to follow some people like Pat Flynn. You might want to write that down, because later on you're going to look it up and go, this passive income thing sounds good, where you can concentrate on the things that you want to do, but you've created a piece of content that's useful to somebody, you put it up online, and then they can then download that, right?
Much like what we've done with our online classes and also building out the Pyramid Mentorship Network. So we're looking obviously at our own ability to diversify the Pyramid brand, much like what you're talking about here.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me get to the book.
Sure.
So the book, I started to think, okay, I started to do these things called mastermind calls. I interviewed this guy one time. His name is Lid Shaw. He's a recording engineer and musician in Nashville. We hit it off, and Lid says, hey, every Friday, there's a group of us from around the country that get online at a particular hour and do a conference video call with each other, and we talk about, audio and audio business and what we're all doing. Would you like to come and join us? So I joined. It meant getting up at 6 a.m. on Friday morning, which is, not great, but when you have kids, it makes it a little easier because you're conditioned to do that. So I got on the call, met all these guys, one in Montreal in Canada, one in England, a guy from Iceland who lives in Tucson, Arizona, Lidge in Nashville, various people, and we got into we get into these conversations about audio, music, and business, and I started to really learn a lot from these guys, and they inspired me to do a book. So I started to come up with a concept of taking transcriptions of these podcasts and kind of adding a bit more and repackaging into a book that I thought, I'll self-publish on Amazon, right?
So wait, I just want to stop you for 1 second here, because this is great, and I really am enjoying hearing about the trajectory of the development of working class audio and your career, but I think maybe it'd be worthwhile to just spend a moment talking about the inspiration for working class audio and how you actually were able to evolve the concept into something that people really believed in and wanted to sponsor and invest in, because you kind of glossed over that.
I guess I
much
did.
like you glossed over your mixing and producing career,
Right.
that you've been growing
Right.
kind of in parallel with
Trying to
that.
squeeze a lot into
Yeah, but I
time.
think it's worth just pausing a moment
Yeah.
before jumping to the book.
Okay.
Because there was a real growth process that I witnessed you do, and I thought it was so impressive what you were able to accomplish in terms of your outreach to the broader audio community on a real international level. And maybe just touch on maybe the few interviews that you feel were the ones that helped spark this whole development process too.
Well, the thing I've glossed over here is there's a lot of videos out there, there's a lot of podcasts where you listen in and they're talking about gear. All they're talking about is gear. Well, what microphone did you use on this kick drum? And which drum machine did you use, to create this beat? It's like, that gets old. There's a bunch of that out there. And I wanted to ask people questions like, oh, okay, well, you got that internship at that studio. How did you do that? Oh, well, why did you make that decision? Why did you do this? Oh, you're married? Oh, what's your work-life balance like? How much do you work and how much do you spend with your spouse? Oh, you have kids? How do you make that work? All these questions about breaking down what people say and not really talking about gear started to appeal to a large group of people. A lot of people are like, oh my God, I've had it up to here with numbers of, Neve this and AKG this. I don't want to hear it anymore. They wanted something that appealed to not only the personal side of all of this, but they wanted to learn oh, well, how did you do that? How do you make your money work? How do you survive? You said you were here, but how are you paying your rent? Oh, like that. Okay. And you start to pull back the curtain on, you know, the mysticism of it all, right?
Yeah, and I would just want to say that for me, that's hugely valuable because we tend to forget that this is all the entertainment business, right? So in the entertainment business, people tend to put up facades.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a lot of, smoke and mirrors about who I am and what my brand represents. And you pierce that veil with this. And I think that's the essence of what you call this, working class audio.
Right.
Because it really comes down to the nuts and bolts of what makes your day tick. What
Right.
makes you tick as
Right.
a person, and how do you make it work for you?
What are your habits? How do you handle money? Do you save money? Do you spend it on does the money come in and you just immediately spend it on gear? Do you go into debt? Or do you have some financial ideas of how to do this better? Do you have better ideas of how to deal with the people in your life better as far as, your work-life balance? How do you get gigs? Do you go out to clubs every night and go see bands? What do you do? How did you get that internship? All these questions that nobody ever asks because they're too caught up in, oh man, what piece of gear do you have there? And oh, you worked with these guys? Oh, what was that like? It's like, I cut through all that bullshit. I don't even want to hear about that. Oh, you're great. You worked with this band. Fantastic. I want to know how you got to that point. What got you in the door? I don't care, what car you drive or all, like Greg says, I want to get past all the smoke and mirror stuff. I want to get down to the human element to like, what do you do to make yourself successful? How have you screwed up?